Welcome to the Government Connection with Mary Scott Nabers. Mary, a former statewide office holder and now CEO of Strategic Partnerships, brings you conversations with industry experts. This is your connection to breaking news, funding opportunities, legislative actions, and more. Brought to you by Government Market News, a division of Strategic Partnerships, Inc.
Good morning, and Michael Irlbeck is my guest today. And Michael, I am just delighted to have you on here. I have to tell this audience that if there's someone in the United States smarter about water than you are, I have not met them yet. So I've known Michael for a long time. He is with EPCOR, and we're going to talk about a very, very hot issue, water, across the United States. But Michael, to start off with, tell us a little bit about EPCOR.
Sure. Thank you, Mary. It's a pleasure to be with you today. The guy you introduced sounds fantastic. I sure hope he shows up to the podcast today. In the meantime, you're going to get me. But I work with EPCOR. It's a company, a private utility company that provides water, wastewater, and energy services to several million people here in the U.S. and Canada.
And Michael, there's so much to talk about. I want to start off though with a really interesting concept that I heard for the first time in talking to you. I've been saying in every presentation I make, we have a water problem, and that water problem is across the entire United States, and we have to fix it because without water, we are in a real problematic situation. And you pointed out to me that we don't have a water resource problem as much as we have a water infrastructure problem. So I'm going to get you to explain that to this audience, because this is really interesting.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, it's important when you're trying to solve problems to really understand the issue. If we don't really understand the challenge, then all of the solutions we're going to develop aren't going to actually scratch the itch, and that includes water resources. So if we perceive the problem that the U.S. is running out of water, or the West, or Texas, we just don't have enough water supplies, so we think the idea is scarcity. Then we start looking to centralize control of water resources and start rationing it out. But that's actually not the case. The U.S., in particular, Texas specifically, in fact, the whole planet, has plenty of water resources. Imagine if we were a band of intergalactic settlers here into the solar system, and we're looking for a place to colonize. We're going to look at Mars, and we're going to have a real concern about water scarcity. The only water on Mars is at the poles, and it's frozen. We think it's got a little bit of groundwater, but mineral rich, but water scarce. And then we're going to look at this blue marble in the solar system called Earth. We would be laughed at if we thought of water scarcity as a problem on planet Earth. 70% of our surface is covered with liquid water, and that doesn't even count the groundwater or the fresh water on the continental basis. We would be much more concerned about mineral scarcity if we were settling Earth than water scarcity. So we keep hearing this water scarcity. We're running out of water. What's happening is in the West in particular, and in the U.S. in general, we went through a really dry spell in the 1930s called the Dust Bowl drought, in the 1950s called the Great Drought. And in response, we built unprecedented investment in new surface water supplies. In the West, 80% of all the reservoir storage capacity we built that we have today was built in a single generation from 1950 to 1990. And so, the people that came before us in the U.S. experienced a really hard drought. They understood the cost of not having water supply, and so they responded by making this epic investment. And we have, for the large part, for the last 30 years, we've stopped building new reservoirs, but we've just been living off and growing off the extra capacity that generation built. Now we're getting to the point where we're needing actual new supplies ourselves. Yeah. We have abundant water. We've got a lot of groundwater. We've got access to the ocean. We still have rivers. But we don't have the infrastructure to develop that water, treat it, and bring it to the places that we live. All of the fresh water that's close to our cities has been developed. That's what we focused on over the last 100 years. And for the next 100 years, we're going to have to go farther away and develop water that has a poorer quality, which it means it's more expensive to treat, and then bring it to the places where we need it. So, yeah, we don't actually have a water scarce problem. We have a water infrastructure problem. We've stopped building water infrastructure, and now it's time to start building again.
Okay, and so, Michael, I assume that what we've got to do now is probably going to be the expensive fix. And I really am a little bit surprised that I have not heard more about this, because I hear so much about the fear of water resources. So are you telling me, though, to get us back to where we stop worrying about water, we've got to invest in pipelines and plants, and is that our remedy?
If we want new water supply to keep saying yes to growth, then we're going to have to build new supplies. And you know what? It's not the 1960s or 70s when the state and federal government were coming in and building large centralized reservoir projects, and then having the federal taxpayer share a lot of those costs for the public benefits that those reservoirs created, like flood control, recreation, those kinds of things. So now we're going to have to actually pay the full freight of the new water supplies. And like I said, it's going to mean more pipelines and more expensive treatment. So most cities have rates right now that are just covering O&M. They're not really covering the new capital charge for new infrastructure. So new water supplies are going to require rate increases almost across the board in the U.S., and that's very unpopular locally and politically.
And that's a subject, of course, that no one wants to talk about. Public officials don't want to talk about the fact that they're going to have to raise water rates, and taxpayers surely don't want to hear that. But it is inevitable, obviously, that we're going to pay more for our water in the future than we are right now. But let's talk about why we are probably going to have private sector investment in this. Cities and counties don't have the resources. The people, the citizens, are not going to want to see that kind of increase. So we have a lot of public-private partnerships now for every new water treatment plant, every big water initiative. So let's skip over and talk about what EPCOR did for San Antonio, because you solved a big water problem there. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so EPCOR is one of the owners and the operator for what they call the Vista Ridge Pipeline. This is a 142-mile, 60-inch diameter pipeline that provides groundwater to the city of San Antonio for drinking water. The city of San Antonio had spent 3 decades conserving water, reducing their per capita use in the city, and what that did was allow them to grow with the same water supply. But they got to the point where they couldn't reduce per capita use anymore, and they actually needed to secure a new supply for growth. And so they put out a competition for private sector to source, develop, and deliver fresh groundwater. And there were 10 proposals they received, and in the end, they picked the Vista Ridge project, and that was contracted in 2014, and it came online in 2020. So the total investment was $978 million, and all of that was financed by private debt and equity, and under a long-term take-or-pay contract with the city of San Antonio. So right now, San Antonio, ever since 2020, they've been getting about 45 million gallons a day from a water source that's 142 miles outside of the city.
Yeah, that is amazing, and that has certainly been a successful project, and we probably are going to see more of that. When you look at which states have the worst water problems right now, I guess, you have to wonder what's stopping more collaborative initiatives like that. Why don't we have more going on right now? And then as we talk about that, let's come back to Texas is not the only state that is seeing all kinds of new data centers going on, being built, being planned. That's going to create even more issues. So why are we not doing this already?
Yeah, issues. Yeah, the move to electrify our economy and go into AI and data centers and cloud storage, that is going to fundamentally shift how the U.S. allocates the power we generate and the water supplies we have, because these facilities require very large point source demands for energy and water. A lot of times these centers can actually generate their own power. If it's not there, they can build their own generation unit behind the meter as part of their facility, because those electrons they don't exist until they create them. And so there's no regulatory hurdles or ownership issues. The water supply really becomes the limiting factor, because you can't create water molecules. You have to go find them, pay for them, and then treat them and deliver them to the facility. And so that brings in a lot more water supply type risks than the energy sector. What we saw before the COVID pandemic was pretty strong growth rates in the U.S., particularly in the West. We were planning for growth. We were seeing very strong growth. After the pandemic, we're seeing unplanned growth rates. We're seeing large economic business sectors move locations. We're seeing population move locations. So there's states that are winning those, states that are losing those. And that growth is actually accelerating the demand for water and power. But it is going to be a significant shift in how we allocate. Some of the projections I've seen just for the data centers is, over the last 100 years, we've built the amount of generation capacity we have in the U.S. for power. We're going to need to double that in the next 7 years to keep pace with all of the new electrification of our economy, which clearly we're not going to be able to do without significant investment. When you look at both power and water over the last 100 years in the U.S., those have been heavily subsidized by state and federal funding, because it's been in the overall public interest to build reservoirs in the West so you can go settle the West and create agriculture. Those days of state and federal spending are largely over. Those budgets don't have room for those kind of large infrastructure projects that are very high risk to develop, that take multiple years, if not decades, of spending at risk before you ever get to a project. And so what's happening is that role and that development capacity is falling into the private sector. So right now you're seeing private capital develop public infrastructure in transportation with roads and toll roads. You're seeing it in power generation with wind farms and solar farms. All of those are private capital. You're seeing it in vertical construction with entertainment centers and campus housing developments. All of that's private capital. And now you're beginning to see private capital come into the water and wastewater, the public water supply, public wastewater treatment systems. So we're seeing a passing of the baton on how you finance large infrastructure, particularly new infrastructure that's more risky, more technology advanced for the private sector.
I have gotten calls over the last year, maybe 2 a week, some months, about how do we get started. We have a water problem. We have whatever kind of problem it is. It's too large. It's too costly for them to do, and they need private sector expertise. And you certainly are very familiar with how San Antonio did it. What are the first 3 things you would advise a community to do to get ready to bring in some private sector partners to help with the essentials that they have to have?
Sure. So I guess the first mindset that you need to come into is this understanding that there are solutions out there. They're going to be more expensive than your current rate structure allows. So you're going to have to find political will to increase rates. We saw this with Vista Ridge, where the community in San Antonio, the business community provided support for city council members to raise rates if they actually secured long-term water supply that would let the community grow. So there was that trade-off between the elected officials and the business community and the local residents of, we're willing to pay higher rates if we can actually secure new supply. So that's going to be essential, or the project is just going to be very difficult to close. Second is you want to define what the city is, or the municipality is willing to contract for. I know that there are cities that have 50 years of water supply needs, but they may only have the appetite to contract for the first 20 years and do a 30-year project, something like that. So really defining that as far as how much water do you need, when and where, and treat it to what quality. After that, that's enough information for a private company to come in, find a solution, and bring proposals in.
So that's a good place to start, and just because I end up talking to a lot of cities and counties, I often explain that they could even consider having an industry sounding where they bring industry in and they say, here's what we need to do, and we're interested in your input. We will procure this. We will have a formal procurement process, but we want to hear your thoughts. They need the outside expertise to help them get started. I want to switch, though, just to one other thing. I know that a lot of citizens, taxpayers, community residents are very, very concerned about the purity of water. Is it safe? Should we be drinking tap water? Should we be finding ways to purify it? Let's talk about that just a moment. And then, I also want to point out to our listeners, there is a way to find out how pure the water is in your state, in your region. There is the Safe Drinking Water Act that the Environmental Protection Agency in the federal government oversees, and they do produce all the time. Here's the most infractions. Here's where the contaminants are the highest. But let's talk about that. That's another water problem we're going to have to deal with.
Yeah, so that's an interesting topic. The more we have the ability to look at the micro level in water chemistry, the more stuff we find there that is man-made that we didn't intend to be there. Whether it's chemicals that are coming through pharmaceuticals and vitamins that are being flushed through the body, through the wastewater system, and then treated and discharged into the rivers, or whether it's fire suppression foam that's getting into groundwater and contaminating. There's a host of issues now that we're seeing in the water supplies we have. So what that requires is just more vigorous treatment. So as the standards for drinking water identify these issues, they do the science, and they set minimum contaminant levels, that'll become nationwide, and all the water systems in the U.S. are going to have to upgrade a treatment system to meet those new standards. So you can have water supply, but if you have a conventional surface water treatment plant and the standard changes, you're going to have to replace that with more expensive technology to meet the new standards. So, what you've touched on is the second level of spending that the U.S. is looking at with its water infrastructure is functional water systems or wastewater systems that need to be upgraded in order to meet new standards. And then the one we've already talked about is the new investment needed for new water supply, new wastewater treatment capacity. And then the third one is there's a lot of old water treatment plants. There's a lot of old wastewater treatment plants in the U.S. that are nearing or have already exceeded their design life. And they were not very expensive to build 30 years ago, 40 years ago, or 50 years ago. But in today's dollar, they're going to be a significant capital investment just to replace the treatment system you have. And rate structures are not really built in the U.S. generally to anticipate that kind of sustaining capital investment to replace existing treatments. So replacing infrastructure because it's old and doesn't work anymore, upgrading treatment systems to comply with new water quality standards, and then building new water and wastewater capacity for growth. These are kind of the summary categories of the challenges we're seeing in the U.S.
I'm looking down at some notes because just for fun, before we got on this program, I just went on the internet and looked at where should you be careful maybe not to drink tap water. And these are the suggestions. The states with the worst tap water right now seem to be Alabama, Maryland, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Texas, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Mississippi. And we are going to, most of the contaminants now that they're finding in water are considered forever contaminants. They don't go away. And so we certainly are going to have to fix this problem too. we've got a lot of work to do.
We do. Yes. Yeah, we do.
And then one other thing I wanted to touch on, we are in a period of time where we're talking about doing away with regulations. Right now, the EPA does not have stated regulations about contaminants that states have to meet. And so I'm always urging our listeners to look at this issue. Whatever you think, your elected officials in Congress need to hear from you, because we're going through a lot of change right now, and it's going to impact every one of us. So just to touch on that. We are running out of time, so I want to give you just a couple of minutes to say, if you had a magic wand to wave, what would you like to see happen to get us in a better situation with our water? Let's just say you were the president of the United States. What would you want to see happen all over this country?
Yeah, I don't know if I would take president, but I'll go back to the magic wand analogy, okay. Mary. I think that the way we see the sector right now is there is an extensive amount of technical expertise, construction experience, and private capital that's looking for a home in water and wastewater infrastructure. The financing rates are very competitive. Those are very low-risk infrastructures for private capital to find a place. So the limitation of why there's not more of this isn't because there's not enough funding. It's really because the customers, the cities, the water supply corporations, these entities haven't yet come to the point where they're ready to raise rates to secure new supply, new infrastructure. And so, part of that is looking at the ratepayers haven't really valued what the water they have is really worth. If you look back at the 1950s, that generation felt the economic pain of what a massive drought does and of what not having water for industry, for cities, and for agriculture, and what that cost. And so in response to that economic pain, they made unprecedented investments that, quite frankly, we've grown into without having to pay for. So for the last 30 years, most ratepayers in the U.S. are used to doubling their population in the service area without really raising their rates that much to cover it. And so they're trained to think that we can grow and we don't have to increase rates. We were able to do that because a lot of the big reservoirs we built had extra capacity that we've used up, and now that's gone. I like to look at kind of the average bill for a utility customer. 30 years ago, there was none of it that was part of data streaming or wireless services or internet fees because, the smartphone really didn't exist back then. Today, those three categories make up about half of the average utility bill. And nobody's really complaining. In a single generation, we've seen our average monthly utility bill double to make room for the tech space. Nobody's complaining except, that Netflix is going to charge me $3 more a month to not watch commercials. That's pretty insulting, but I'll probably pay it. It's because we can't imagine doing life today without digital services, streaming services, cell services. Okay, and so we've intrinsically attached an economic value to that. What we need to be better doing messaging is doing the same thing for our ratepayers, is attaching the economic value of having new water supply versus not having it. Because once the ratepayers understand that things can be a lot worse or things can be a lot better depending on our willingness to increase what we pay for water and wastewater services, that I think is the core message to help communities overcome this hurdle of raising rates to accommodate growth.
Yeah. And I guess, I'm also not ever going to be president of the United States, but if I was, I would do probably a media campaign to try to explain to people all over the country that most of our infrastructure was built through public-private partnerships, and most of it was financed by private sector. And look where we are today. We're the greatest nation in the world. And so going forward, we have so many problems. And they're all wrapped around our critical infrastructure, water and power and our grids. So I do think we're going to have to go forward with public-private partnerships, collaborative initiatives. And I guess I would just want people to know Don't fear that so much. The public entities are going to own all of it, and they're going to be able to control the contracts and work with private sector and get all of that expertise, which we don't have in government. So we are in for a few interesting years here. And I really appreciate you coming to talk to us about water, because that's going to be a high priority.
It's my pleasure, Mary. Thank you so much for inviting me, and hope this was useful to your audience.
I hope so. I know so. And we will have you back again, Michael. So thanks so much. Watch for us. We'll be online with this, and it'll be on our site. And you can get this program with any of your media options, your podcast options that you want to use. So thank you. We'll see you on the next program.
Bye-bye.
This has been The Government Connection with Mary Scott Nabers. If you enjoyed the conversation, be sure to subscribe to get notifications on our upcoming programs. We hope you'll leave a review wherever you get your podcasts and send us any programming suggestions directly. Thanks for listening.